I trusted my son-in-law because my daughter asked me to. That was my first mistake. Looking back now, I can see exactly where I went wrong, and I'm not proud of how long it took me to see it. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working as a land surveyor in British Columbia, and I made the mistake that a lot of men my age make. I confused loyalty with love. My wife, Maureen, passed away in the spring of 2021. Ovarian cancer. We had 18 months between the diagnosis and the end, and we used every one of those months well. We said everything we needed to say. We held hands through the hard nights. We made peace with what we couldn't change. When she finally let go, on a Tuesday morning in April with the cherry blossoms just opening outside her window, I was holding her hand and I was grateful she wasn't in pain anymore. What I was not prepared for was the silence afterward. Our house in Kelowna was too big for one person. 3 bedrooms, a deck overlooking the lake, Maureen's garden along the south fence. I'd walk through the kitchen in the morning and expect to smell coffee already made because she'd always been up before me. The absence of small things undoes you faster than the big ones. Our daughter, Christine, called every few days at first. She lived in Calgary with her husband, a man named Derek, who worked in oil and gas consulting and drove a truck that cost more than my first house. Christine was 39, capable, sharp. She had her mother's instinct for reading a room and her father's stubbornness about admitting when something was wrong. About 4 months after Maureen died, Christine called and suggested I come stay with them for a while. "Just for the winter, Dad," she said. "The house will still be there in spring. You shouldn't be rattling around in it alone." I said I was fine. She called again 2 weeks later. Then Derek called, which was unusual, because Derek and I had always been polite but not warm, and said they had plenty of space and it would mean a lot to Christine. That softened me. I didn't want my grief to become her worry. So in November I packed a bag, arranged for a neighbor to keep an eye on the house, and drove to Calgary. The first few weeks were genuinely good. Christine cooked Sunday dinners. Derek showed me around the neighborhood. Their 2 kids, my grandchildren, Owen and Sarah, 9 and 6, dragged me into their games and their arguments and their loud, cheerful chaos. I slept better than I had in months. I started to think Christine had been right, that I'd needed this. It was somewhere around January that the small things started. Derek mentioned casually that his firm was looking at an investment opportunity, something to do with a private real estate syndicate in Red Deer. He didn't ask me anything directly. He just mentioned it. The way you mention something when you want it to settle in someone's mind before you ask. A week later, over dinner, he mentioned it again, said one of his colleagues had already put in $50,000 and expected a strong return by summer. He looked at me in that particular way, not quite asking, just leaving the door open. I said it sounded interesting. I should have said nothing. What I didn't fully understand yet was that I had become something in that house. Not a father, not a grandfather. I had become an asset, a liquid one. Now that Maureen was gone and the Kelowna house was paid off and my pension from the provincial government came in reliably every month. Derek was not a cruel man, exactly. He was an ambitious one, and in certain kinds of ambitious people, the line between an opportunity and a person gets very thin. By February, Derek had shown me a folder. Prospectus, he called it. Investment documents. He said his own father had already reviewed it and approved. He said the window was closing at the end of the month. He put a pen on the table beside the folder. "You don't have to," he said, "but I wanted to give you the chance." I asked how much. "Whatever you're comfortable with," he said. "Obviously the minimum buy-in is $40,000, but some people go higher depending on what they can spare." I told him I'd think about it. That night I lay awake in the guest bedroom of my daughter's house and looked at the ceiling and tried to locate the feeling that was bothering me. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something quieter. A low hum, like a refrigerator running in another room. I'd spent 31 years reading land surveys. You develop an instinct for when something doesn't line up. The prospectus had the right words in it, but the spacing between the words felt wrong. I didn't sign anything. I said I needed more time. Derek's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Things were slightly different after that. Not dramatically, just slightly. Derek started referring to my contributions around the house in a way that had a faint accounting quality to it. How much the groceries cost, how the hydro bill had gone up, how the kids' activities were expensive this year. Not accusations, just information, delivered at the table in front of Christine, in front of the children. Christine didn't say much when he did it. That bothered me more than Derek did. In March, I told Christine I was thinking about going back to Kelowna in April, as planned. She said that was fine. She said it in the voice people use when something is not fine. Then, on a Saturday afternoon, Derek said he had errands to run and asked if I wanted to come along. I said sure. I hadn't been out much that week, and the cabin fever of a Calgary March does things to your mood. We drove to a part of the city I didn't know well. Near the ring road, a strip of commercial buildings with accountants and mortgage brokers and that sort of thing. Derek said he needed to drop something off quickly. He pulled into a parking lot and said, "Actually, could you come in for a second? I might need a witness signature." I went in. The office was small. A woman at the front desk looked up and smiled in a way that suggested she had been expecting us. There was another man, already inside, behind a desk. Middle-aged, navy suit, the kind of watch that costs a certain amount and is meant to be noticed. Derek introduced me as his father-in-law. The man said his name was something I've since forgotten. It doesn't matter, and he slid a folder across the desk. "Just the transfer authorization," Derek said, glancing at me. "Standard thing for the syndicate. Your name needs to be on it since the account is partially in Maureen's estate." I looked at the folder. I opened it. It was not a witness signature form. It was a document authorizing the transfer of funds from an estate account into a numbered corporation. My name was already partially filled in, at the top, next to Maureen's name. The amount on the line was not $40,000. The amount on the line was $112,000. I read the number twice to make sure I was reading it correctly. Then I closed the folder. I looked at Derek. He was looking at the man in the navy suit. Neither of them was looking at me. "I need a minute," I said. I stood up and walked toward the back of the office, where there was a small hallway with a washroom. I went in, locked the door, and stood at the sink with the cold water running over my wrists, the way you do when your body is trying to catch up to your brain. $112,000. Maureen's estate account. My name being used without my full understanding of what I was signing, and my daughter at home with the children, not knowing I was here, or that. And this was the thought that hit me like cold water, knowing exactly where I was. I stood there for a moment. Then I noticed the window above the toilet. It was a small frosted pane, the kind that tilts outward for ventilation. I looked at it for a long moment. I am 67 years old. I have a bad knee and a slightly unreliable left shoulder from a fall I took on a survey site in 2009. But I have also been climbing in and out of awkward terrain for 31 years, and I still know how to move my body through a tight space when I need to. I opened the window. I pulled myself up onto the toilet tank. I pushed the window fully open, and I went through it. It was March in Calgary. I want to be clear about what that means. It was 4 degrees above zero, and there was a crust of old snow along the base of the building wall. I landed in it with both feet, stumbled, caught myself on the brick. My knee screamed at me. I ignored it. I walked quickly around the corner of the building, away from the parking lot where Derek's truck was sitting. There was a Tim Hortons about half a block down. I walked into it, found a table near the back, sat down, and took out my phone. I called my nephew, Martin, who is 34 and works for a firm that does financial compliance auditing. I call him my nephew, but he's actually the son of my late brother, which makes him family in the way that actually means something. He picked up on the third ring. I told him where I was and what had just happened. I read him the number from memory. I described the document. Martin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Don't sign anything. Don't go back in there. Stay where you are." "I'm at a Tim's," I said. "Good. Order a coffee. I'll call you back in 15 minutes. I ordered a large dark roast. I sat with it and watched the door and waited. Derek called my phone twice in that 15 minutes. I let it ring. Martin called back in 12. He said he'd reached out to a colleague who handled estate fraud cases. The structure I described, using a partial estate account linked to a deceased spouse's name to authorize a corporate transfer, was a known method. Not uncommon. There were people who specialized in finding recently widowed individuals who had been brought into a family home, separated from their regular financial advisors, and gradually softened up with manufactured urgency. "Is Christine involved?" I asked him. He paused. "I don't know. Does she know where you are today?" I thought about that. I thought about her voice when she said it was fine for me to go back to Kelowna. I thought about Derek talking about grocery bills at the dinner table. I thought about how she hadn't looked at me much in February. "I don't know," I said. "Okay," Martin said. "Here's what we're going to do." What we did was this. Martin called a lawyer he knew in Calgary, a woman who handled elder financial abuse cases and who agreed to see me that afternoon. I took a cab from the Tim Hortons to her office near downtown. I did not respond to Derek's calls. I answered Christine's call, which came about 40 minutes after I'd climbed out the window, and I told her calmly that I had stepped out for some air and that I was fine. She asked where I was. I said I was just walking around a bit and I'd be back later. She said okay. She sounded relieved, which told me she knew more than she should have. The lawyer's name was Anita Mehta. She was in her 50s, efficient and unsentimental in exactly the way you want someone to be when your hands are still shaking from reading a number on a piece of paper. She had seen, she told me, this situation or a version of it dozens of times in her practice. The mechanism changed, but the pattern didn't. A recently bereaved older person, brought into a family home under the guise of care, slowly isolated from their prior financial life, then presented with documents at a moment of manufactured trust. She asked me a number of questions. She asked about Maureen's estate and who was administering it. She asked about the Kelowna house and whether it was in my name alone or jointly held. She asked whether I had a financial planner I'd used regularly back home. I did. A man named Ron Bacher in Kelowna, who'd handled Maureen's and my accounts for 11 years. I called him while I was sitting in Anita's office, and he confirmed something important. No withdrawal authorization had yet been processed from Maureen's estate account. The documents I'd been brought to sign were the necessary step before any money moved. The fact that I hadn't signed them meant the account was intact. I let out a breath that had been sitting in my chest since March. Anita advised me to contact the estate's administering notary to inform my bank directly that no third-party transfers were authorized, and to make notes of every conversation, every document I'd seen, every amount mentioned. She also said that what Derek had attempted, presenting a misleading document to a family member for signature under false pretenses, was something the Calgary Police Financial Crimes Unit would be interested in hearing about. I went back to Christine and Derek's house that evening. I made a decision not to make a scene, not to yell, not to confront Derek in front of the children. Owen and Sarah didn't need to see their grandfather turn into something angry and frightened in their kitchen. I packed my bag. I came downstairs with it. Derek was in the living room. Christine was in the kitchen, and when she saw the bag, she went very still. I told them I had decided to drive back to Kelowna the next morning. I told them I was grateful for the time I'd spent with the grandchildren. I said it clearly and without heat. Derek said that was very sudden. I said yes, it was. He looked at me for a moment and seemed to be calculating something. Then he asked if everything was okay. I said I needed to attend to some financial matters back home. I looked at him when I said the word financial. He understood what that meant. Christine started to say something, then stopped. She walked across the kitchen and hugged me, and I stood there and let her. And I kept my arms at my sides because I didn't know yet what she had known or when she had known it, and I couldn't pretend otherwise. I drove out of Calgary the next morning at 6. I stopped at a gas station just east of Cochrane and sat in the parking lot for a little while, watching the Rockies in the rearview mirror. Maureen and I had driven that highway together probably 50 times over the years. She used to pack sandwiches for the drive, even though we could have stopped anywhere, because she said the ones you made yourself tasted better. She was right about most things. Here is what I found out over the following months through Anita, and through the process that eventually followed. Derek had done this before, not with family, but with clients. He had been named in a civil complaint 2 years earlier involving a similar investment syndicate in Edmonton, a case that had settled quietly before going to court. The numbered corporation he'd been trying to route Maureen's estate funds into had 2 other names on it, a colleague from his firm, and an individual with a prior fraud conviction in Ontario. Christine knew about the Edmonton complaint. She had known before I arrived. She told me this herself in a phone call in June, after Derek had moved out and she had retained her own lawyer. She said she had convinced herself it was different this time, that it was family, that it wasn't really what it looked like. I told her I understood how people convince themselves of things when they love someone. I told her I was still her father. I told her that what she had done, or failed to do, had put her mother's money and her father's trust at risk, and that was going to take time. She said she knew. We are still working on it. These things take time. What I did not expect, in the middle of all of it, was a call from Maureen's notary in Kelowna, a woman named Sandra T. who had handled Maureen's estate documents during those last months of illness. Sandra called in April, a few weeks after I was back home, to tell me that Maureen had made a modification to the estate structure in November 2020, about 6 months before she passed. Maureen had placed the Kelowna house and a portion of her savings into a trust, administered independently, with Ron Bacher as trustee. The trust terms specified that the assets could not be transferred, leveraged, or encumbered without Ron's written authorization and mine together, with a mandatory 7-day review period built in. Maureen had done this without telling me. She knew my tendency, she'd told Sandra, to want to trust the people I loved even when I shouldn't. She knew that losing her would make me vulnerable in ways I wouldn't recognize. So she had quietly built a wall around what we'd spent our lives building together, and she had done it while she was still in treatment, when I thought she was only worrying about the pain. Sandra read me the note Maureen had attached to the trust instructions. I'm not going to put all of it here. It was private. But the last line was, "He'll figure it out eventually. I just want to give him enough time." I stood in my kitchen in Kelowna, Maureen's kitchen, with the window that looks out to her garden, where the crocuses were already coming up along the south fence, and I held the phone and didn't say anything for a long moment. Sandra, to her credit, didn't try to fill the silence. Derek was eventually the subject of a formal complaint to the Alberta Securities Commission. A civil claim followed, and I was one of several individuals who provided statements. I don't know exactly where that process stands now. Anita handles the updates, and she knows I don't need every detail. What I know is that no money left Maureen's estate. What I know is that the house is mine, the trust is intact, and Owen and Sarah still come to Kelowna every summer and fight over who gets to sleep in the room with the window that faces the lake. Christine and I talk on the phone every Sunday. It is not the same as it was. I don't know if it will ever be quite the same, but she is trying in the way that people try when they understand they have to earn something back slowly. What I know about grief now is that it makes you permeable. You lose a person and the boundaries of your life go soft, and the people around you know it, even if they don't say so. Some of them hold you up. Some of them see an opening. Maureen knew which kind Derek was before I did. She knew it, and she did not say it outright, because she also knew I would not have listened. So she did what she could do, with the time she had, and she left me a door I didn't know was locked until someone tried to open it without a key. I think about that woman every day. I think I will until it's my turn to go. But in the meantime, the crocuses are up, and the lake is thawing, and I have sandwiches to make for a drive.